Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 2 o'clock and this hearing session is open. Could I just check, is there anybody here who hasn't attended a previous session? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you. My name's Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. That's examination on the examination website as document SD01. That's the submitted plan. This hearing sessions, the previous ones and the ones subsequent ones going up to July are part of the examination process, which started with the submission of the plan in November of last year and will end with the submission of my report to the council. Jill Taylor is the programme officer for the examination. She's working independently of the council at my direction, is responsible for all administrative arrangements. If you have any queries about the running of the examination and hearing sessions, please have a word with her or email her. Her contact details are on the website. Few housekeeping things. Phones, please can you make sure that they're put to silent. Laptops the same. Toilet facilities are on the second floor, follow the signs. Fire alarm, we're not expecting one. We're not expecting a test today. So if there is a fire, out the door and follow the signs, down the staircase, follow the signs. For the Wickham room, which is the overspill room, is it?
Yes.
Is it called the Wickham room? What do they do? Follow.
As they come out the door, the fire escape is directly to your left.
Okay. And follow the signs. Leads, please, when people start getting up, when we adjourn, people start getting up, can you please, laptop leads, can you just bring them in, unplug them, bring them in so that they're not a trip hazard for people. And I would suggest that people don't walk in this area just because there are trip hazards around. I'm assuming that everybody has already seen copies of the guidance notes, matters, issues and questions and hearing programme. They've all been published on the website some time ago. I've published an agenda for this session. Now you'll notice that that doesn't cover all the issues which I had questions about. I'm focusing on those that I want or need to hear more about to come to sound conclusions. Now, I've read all the representations and supporting material provided by all parties and written statements prepared for the hearings. Just to remind you, it's not an inquiry into all the matters that have been raised. Rather, the purpose of these hearings is to help me decide whether the plan is legally compliant and if it's sound. So my starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. Those considering that the plan is not legally compliant or seeking changes to the plan have to demonstrate that to me, referring to the 4 tests of soundness in the NPPF, paragraph 35. Now, if I were to conclude that the plan's not legally compliant or sound, the council would not be able to adopt it in its current form. The council's already suggested proposed modifications to the plan, and those are at SD 14A, 14B, 14C, and I will be looking at those in assessing the soundness of the plan and indeed whether they are required, or if I find deficiencies, whether they indeed do the job and address the concern. I just want to make it clear my approach to emission sites. Part of my task is to examine the soundness of the approach to meeting the plan's needs, including the sites that are allocated for development. Those who have submitted representations to the effect that the site is unsound will not be able to put their views to me at the relevant session. If they've made a request to do so, the council will have an opportunity to respond. Sites that have been put forward for inclusion in the plan but not selected for allocation are known informally as omission sites. It's not part of my role to examine the soundness of those, and subject to the legal right to be heard, such sites will not normally be discussed in detail at the hearings. Instead, what will happen is, should the situation arise that additional sites are needed, I'll look to the council in the first instance to decide which alternative sites should be brought forward for examination, and they'll go through the assessment process that the council has put in place. Okay, any queries on procedural matters I've raised? Okay, could I just housekeeping matter, the schedule? Now, is the council working? I appreciate that you've been in hearing, so
yeah, my colleague over there has been working on it busily. I think we're up to the natural environment topic at the moment. So we are making progress. Obviously, I believe we're not sitting tomorrow, so we should be able to make substantial progress.
That would be very helpful, so that I can look at that and we're very clear about what the suggestions are, and then we can start to look at it in more detail as and if appropriate. Okay. So this hearing session, I want to consider the methodology that was put in place for the suggested or proposed site allocations, and that will frame our discussion next week when we talk in detail about the sites that are proposed for allocation in this plan. So first of all, what I often do is spend some time with the council. I ask the questions that I want to ask, and then I open it up to the table. When I go around, please, could I ask you to keep your responses focused on the question asked? When you want to speak, if you turn your nameplate up like that, I'll bring you into discussion at an appropriate time. If somebody before you says exactly what you wanted to say, just say, I totally agree with that. However, I'd like to add X, Y, and Z. That's the most helpful way to me. It might be that I go back to the council. It might be that I don't have to. It might be that I would have questions for you. Okay, so if we turn to my issue is whether the site allocation methodology proposed housing, mixed use and non-residential site allocations is justified, effective and consistent with national policy. So I just want to check my understanding and chronology about what you did. The first thing is, in terms of site selection, you looked at extant local plan allocations, and we'd heard a lot about the extant local plan allocations. You reappraised those against the IIA to consider how they scored against, because we've got a revised framework for the SA and the HRAs as it was evolving at that time. You looked at new allocations, and they came from the Sheila, the 2021 Sheila, and in the same way were assessed through the IIA, the updated Sheila, which was the 23 Sheila, and where appropriate, site visit was carried out. Now, that was followed in some cases with discussion with the parish council, and I want to come on to that in a bit more detail. And then you went through the site selection criteria. You used the site selection criteria, including sites adjacent to the built form of settlement, which we touched on in previous sessions. You considered infrastructure requirements and policy requirements, and then you assess them in the usual way. You know, other evidence-based documents, STA, FRA, the flood risk assessment, HRA, etc. And then we got to Reg 19 stage. Is that a sort of summary? Have I understood that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the methodology, now there are only two things really I want to drill down to on this. First of all, is this issue in the IIA. Sites were assessed. There's an assessment there, proposed allocations and emission sites. And what you do is you assess proposed allocation. You assess all on a standard basis, and you don't take into account supporting information, I don't know, master plans or whatever that has been submitted in support of the allocation from the promoter. Okay, what you then do when you go on to the next step is you assess the proposed allocations and indeed take into account the supporting information and test it again in the way that I've said. Now, just to explain, there's been quite a lot of concern around the table. Well, how can you say that there are reasonable alternatives if some of them you're assessing on one basis and then you're going on to a more detailed assessment on the proposed allocations? Does that give a level playing field for reasonable alternatives? That's the nub of what I want to hear. Thank you. Is it Mr. Ayling? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. We've read those representations too. We think that it's actually very helpful that the IA is seen to be doing those sustainability appraisals. Our policy off has been described in the first instance. I think it would be difficult to have a consistent process for the SA in the first instance that didn't do that. Any resulting allocations, of course, are part of the IA of the finished plan, but in the first instance, the site assessment should be policy off. However, we are able to think about mitigation, other benefits, that planning gain, all of that really, as part of the site allocations process, and that's on the table, if you like, when we're looking at our shortlisted sites. So the development strategy and site selection background paper lists, if you like, that slightly shorter list. It's a per settlement, not per parish list of sites that are shortlisted in the paper, and we're mindful of the sort of wider offer and wider potential each one brings to it. So we think we're maintaining a consistent process whilst also being mindful of the fact that there are all potential other measures, benefits, things being offered as part of that.
Okay, can I just be very clear? So what you referred to as policy off, first of all, you assessed all on an equal basis, didn't take any mitigation, if we want to call it, but supporting information from the promoter at the first stage. The second stage, and it was the IIA of the Reg 19 plan, it's at that time that you assess them taking into account supporting information
of the allocated sites at that point. That's where the IIA has assessed that resulting strategy.
Okay, so it was just on those proposed sites. What was the outcome of that?
With the assessment of the plan as a whole is the IIA that you in the main IIA report that is submitted with the plan. What it does not do, however, is go back and reassess all of the individual Sheila assessments that are in the forgive me, Appendix F of the IIA. They remain unchanged, but the plan as a whole is assessed in the IA support, in the IA document that is submitted.
Sorry, my question was, and what was the outcome of that assessment of the site allocations with the supporting information?
Oh, I see.
The proposed site allocations. Did any fallout?
I think I understand, but please correct me.
Yeah.
So the strategy, the plan made up of the allocations is part of the IIA, the essay of the plan as a whole, tested against the sustainability framework, is found to be consistent with the aims of the framework to achieve a sustainable outcome based on the strategy that we've pursued. I know we've addressed the overall level of development in previous sessions.
Okay, thank you. Can I just say the other query I have is with regard to you spoke about, or I raised the issue of discussion with the parish councils. Can you explain how that was done? And we've got a number of concerns that have been expressed about that. Can you explain that to me and address the concern? I think it was O'Flynn who made the concern, was it? Various people have.
Yeah.
Could you just address that, please?
Yes, by way of brief introduction, Winchester is not wholly parished. So the city of Winchester itself is not parished at the present. So there's a town forum there. So it's a slightly different mix and match approach. But in any event, Winchester is a slightly different position anyway. But in terms of our engagement with parish councils, if I deal with the market towns and rural areas sort of area first, if you like, we had an emerging development strategy, which was we were seeking a certain level of development in settlements for each, and there was a officer discussion at a meeting of the parish council, or often online. We were sort of still in a sort of post sort of COVID working experience group, but there was a discussion with the parish council about the emerging plan. They'd obviously recently had the SIP consultation the year before, so we're talking about 2022. And we were seeking the parish council to consider whether it was able to nominate one or more sites to meet the level of development that was expected to occur in that settlement for the emerging plan. And to be clear, we didn't want to give them an enormous rule book. It's our plan, and I'll return to that. But still, we made it clear we were seeking sites in or adjacent settlements. So it wasn't a parish figure; it was a settlement figure, which is subject to much discussion in some cases. But we were seeking nominations for us to consider through our plan process. If I may, some parish councils felt that they were able to do that based on what they knew already. Some, for instance, had recently undertaken. They felt they'd had enough community engagement on this matter. They were able to articulate a view very quickly as to what their preferred or nominated sites were. Others needed to undertake some consultation virtually there and then in the early summer of 2022. And some parish councils felt they were unable to nominate because they were unconvinced that it was appropriate for that settlement to receive an allocation. And so the way in which the parish has engaged with its community is set out in the site strategy paper. I think what you're asking for, though, is there's some concerns. I think it's only one of the representations I've seen, or statements rather, is the extent to which it's appropriate to, if you like, lean, and how far we should lean on the parish council view in this process. I mean, for our part, I hope we've made it clear. This was certainly in discussion with the parish councils. This is very much our plan. And we wanted to give parish councils the opportunity to nominate sites, but we were clear with them that we needed to justify that selection and confirm that it is the most appropriate selection through our evidence and our process. And so, frankly, for that reason was why we were less prescriptive, for instance, on that matter of community engagement. It's that initial go, if you like, was really under the remit of the parish councils. We knew there was a Regulation 18 consultation coming.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you had a site selection methodology. Whether sites were put forward by parish councils or not, they still went through the rigour of the site selection methodology. And I think what you're saying to me is that you use planning judgment to assess.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Fox?
Thank you. If I could just add a little bit more detail to it, mainly because I was here and Doug joined afterwards. Basically, I always were very clear in kind of 2020, 2021 with the parish councils and town councils that we obviously were preparing the local plan. This was coming. Look at the sheet of sites now, was my words. And that's why some parish councils were very organised in terms of knowing which sites they liked and others didn't. We as officers also undertook site visits just to make sure, kind of sense check that what we were asking the parish councils in terms of the number could be achievable. In other words, were there, from our professional judgment, reasonable alternatives that could accommodate the level of growth that we were giving those parish councils? Because we wanted to be convinced. I wasn't going to set them up to fail, because if there wasn't the sites there wasn't the sites. So we wanted to be confident that there were sites. If I can give an example, Kingsworthy actually mail dropped the whole parish with the Sheila map and asked people to basically nominate sites. And that was a very good way of basically getting a very good flavour from the community about which sites, and a clear message from the parishes basically about what sites. So I do think, and obviously there is varying degrees which parish council did that, but we were always very clear with them, this is coming. You need to get yourself. We want to do it from the grassroots upwards because you know your community. Please tell us what you think are the best sites. And like I say, some of them went over and above in terms of basically how they engage their public drop-in events, Bishop's Waltham, Kingsworthy did a complete mail drop of the whole village, etc. And we think it was very effective in terms of how they engaged with the parishes. And it was really encouraging, actually, I think. So it came from them in terms of basically which sites basically gone. And then obviously we did a sense check in the office, where I remember it distinctly. We had a series of meetings where we sat around the table with what the parish council said, what did the IIA say, what did our landscape officer say, what did our ecology think, and so basically then we were able to sense check what was coming back from them. And I think that was a really important kind of part of the process, with us basically as officers using our own local knowledge, plus obviously expertise from other departments, to actually say, yeah, we think that's sensible, that's a good site. And actually, in charge, basically the results were very similar to what we would have done. So that was encouraging in itself.
Okay. So as regardless of what the nominations, if you want to call it, from the parish councils were, they went through the same process. Okay, I understand that. And of course, a lot of the comment that I have read is actually about the scoring that took place in the site selection process. Do you want to comment on that? I mean, I don't intend to get into the details of scoring on particular sites, but would you like to respond to that? Because a lot of the comment that I've read is on that basis. Mr. Ayling?
Yes, very briefly. When we talk about shortlisted sites, short but focused pieces of evidence on transport, landscape, and heritage matters were produced prior to the selection of sites. We also had the IIA, the essay appraisals of each, that had included in it under a number of the objectives on those individual site assessments. For instance, walking distances to various services and facilities that I know have been mentioned in a number of the representations. So we believe that there was a level playing field in terms of an assessment on that basis. And you can see in the appendices of both the main document as well as the specific documents prepared for Sutton Scotney and for Wickham that those documents were prepared to ensure we had that for those shortlisted sites.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ayling. Can I open it up to the table, please? Mr. Packer?
Thank you. Yeah, Simon Packer from Turley on behalf of Hather Property. I wanted to pick up a specific concern with regard to the consultation with the Parish Council and Wanstead Parish Council in particular, in reference to Sutton Scotney. Some of this is covered in the statements to the session. So the concern is specifically with regard to the timing of the Parish Council discussions, community discussions and engagement, and whether or not that was appropriate, and whether or not that was sufficiently detailed. So just to give you, if I may, a quick bit of context. So completely agree, Sheila is an appropriate starting point, and in respect of Sutton Scotney, there are two sites that are appropriate. They're both on the edge of the settlement boundary, so appropriate in principle. The oddity with Sutton Scotney was that the drainage infrastructure was not in place, and you'll have seen that from the statements that have been made. So at the regulation 18 stage, no allocations were proposed in Sutton Scotney because of delays to delivery of the drainage infrastructure. Obviously, there was an opportunity of submitting representations to that. Southern Water submitted representations, and in summary, they suggested that through phasing development, some allocations could be put forward. So that is at the consultation stage in November 2022. Now, I think that the challenge that my client has found is that it wasn't until last year, August 24 last year, shortly before the publication of the Regulation 19 plan, that there was any further detailed discussion with the parish council. And when that did happen, and I believe it was a public meeting on the 4th of September, the preferred site was presented as a fait accompli in our view. Now, I raise this because I'm not convinced that that sits very comfortably with paragraph 16C of the MPPF, which does confirm that plans should be shaped by early, proportionate and effective engagement between plan makers and communities. And I think this goes back to the tests of soundness and particular justification that you've mentioned before. So in short, we feel there was ample opportunity for the City Council to engage much earlier with Wanston Parish Council. And I say that in the context of the response from Southern Water to the Reg 18 consultation. Had they done this, then I think, as you'll see from the representations that have been submitted to the submission plan, they would have found that the Parish Council, the community, and to use Mr. Ayling's terminology, would have nominated a different site to that that's been allocated. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gately?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Just to cover a wider point, is that our concern with this is that it's not a true site selection process if the ultimate outcome of it is that largely there are very few sites are being selected.
Sorry, Mr. Gately, there's some noise outside, ambient noise. Would you mind speaking up a little bit?
So we don't think this is a true site selection process, given that so few sites are ultimately selected as a result of it, with a single greenfield site having been selected in Winchester. That's 1% of the total in the plan. Obviously, the reliance on previous site allocations means that the selection process effectively happened 10 years ago for a lot of the supply. And in the case of the brownfield city centre sites, probably 1,000 years ago or more, being within the city boundaries. But in as far as the sites have been a subject of the impact assessment, it's not even the case that the most appropriate ones by the scoring that's been given are the ones that have come out. And I know you don't want to get into a blow-by-blow account of which ones receive the highest scoring, but it's certainly the case that certainly the Barracks site and the Courtney site do not come out as the highest in the scoring mechanism, and as far as it's been run, and that's apparent from the amount of orange scoring in the IAA relative to a number of others. And I know we won't particularly fly the flag for any specific ones today. So the effect is that the site selection process doesn't meet the overarching objectives of the plan, which is to put development in the most sustainable locations at all.
Thank you, Mr. Gately. Mr. Young?
Thank you, Madam. So it doesn't follow. So you have the hierarchy, but it doesn't follow it in terms of the allocation. So if you stick with the
sorry,
30,
Mr. Young, could you start again? Sorry.
Okay, yeah. So they have the settlement hierarchy, but then they don't follow it as far as allocations are concerned. If we stick with the 37.2% figure, then there aren't allocations to reflect that in terms of the plan, because they're relying significantly on existing sites. And we did suggest to you, really, Winchester, with being such head and shoulders above everything else, should be 50%. And again, obviously, clearly not enough sites on that basis. But just sticking with that principle, one greenfield site allocated for 150 houses, and it's been said, the affordable housing delivery from that, frankly, being minimal. I think the key point is, how would you solve this problem? Because we can all, you know what all the problems are. We've told you about the problems for 2 days. What's the answer? The answer is to allocate further sites. Now, our site and others, I'm not talking about specifics, but other sites at Winchester, because that's the only way you can solve that problem, is about 2,000 to 3,000 homes. And that would be a sensible way to rectify the situation and have proper delivery on a proper scale taking place, which wasn't based on past delivery. Is that realistic? Well, the council itself has been delivering in the last 3 years around 1,000 homes a year. And this plan's meant to be significantly boosting the supply. So surely the annual requirement should be higher than that, which coincides coincidentally with the standard method. The standard method obviously being significantly influenced by affordability being a major problem. But you could deliver that with that scale of additional development at Winchester, which would then be much more consistent with the strategy. I'm afraid I do have a real problem with this reliance on past sites, because if they're going to rely on past sites, we need to look at what the previous plan said. What did the previous plan anticipate was the delivery? It wasn't all at the end and then include that in this plan. At the very least, if you are going to go back to 2020, and none of us in the development industry think that's sensible, then you should be looking at redistributing the delivery from those sites that are in the previous plans, plural, and ensuring that that even distribution doesn't result in this kind of bunching up in the last 3 years. And again, all of that leads to more allocations in Winchester to properly reflect the settlement hierarchy, which we're still critical of, but even working off the council's number. I mean, to really genuinely, in an area like this, it's not a London borough, it's not physically impossible. In an area like this, we're not even in the green belt. To have one greenfield site in your principal town for 150 houses. I mean, it's been said by others, but the plan is, let's just be honest about it. The plan is all about a version of Winchester that the councillors prefer, which is that very little development takes place at Winchester. That's what this plan is about. How is that right? There are lots of jobs and we can see it more in the town centre, lots of other jobs, industrial estates. And this town is geared up with huge park and rides to deal with its congestion issues. The strategy, we're not overtly criticising, although we think it could be better, but the plan doesn't reflect the strategy.
Okay, thank you. Crowders? Thank you.
Thank you, Mum. So if we look at justified in the NPPF, it says an appropriate strategy taking into account the reasonable alternatives and based on proportionate evidence. The council sought a two-phase approach, one initially through the SAIA, and then they've gone for a bottom-up approach where they've approached parish councils. Those parish councils don't have the planning knowledge that the council have. There is quite clearly in the evidence base provided by the council in the topic paper a very, very, very varied approach taken by different parish councils in terms of how they presented, how they engaged with their community, and how eventually people wrote in and those choices were made. This is the first point in which I've heard that the council undertook a sense check over all of those points. I can't see it in any of the topic paper. There's certainly no commentary. Yes, we agree with the sites, so we're taking them forwards. We would make comment that sites omitted that were sustainable were omitted because of local politics over anything else, but we'll leave that there. this is an approach the council's kind of seeking to replicate from a previous local plan. And in that site selection methodology, they very much went with the parishes and took them along on the process and guided them in some regards. That's not evident here, and left parish councils without, some of which have neighbourhood plan groups and will have knowledge of planning wider than what they're being asked to do, but many didn't. And particularly if I look at Colden Common as an example that Crowdace are interested in, compared to Kingsworthy and that mentioned by Mr. Fox, it's an incredibly poor evidence base for the council to then take forwards. There is no adjustment from sites taken forwards where the council then added or corrected or added additional sites that I'm aware of in parish selected sites. And I understand that there's a political dynamic there to manage, but in justified strategy, did they actually make those correct choices? And as I've said, the consequence being that sustainable sites have been omitted.
Sorry, the last bit you said?
Sustainable sites have been omitted.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. Could I turn to Barwood, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I very much reiterate a lot of what the last speakers just said in terms of how the consultation with the parish council took place. We've raised lots of concerns in both our Reg 18 and Reg 19 about how this consultation took place. And is obviously sort of placed with making important decisions, and we don't feel that they were given the appropriate advice on the assessment process. And as a result, sites have been omitted that potentially could have been taken forward. On that point, in terms of when they actually put a site forward to the council, I think we've already sort of raised this point in on Monday, but it was at a point when they were actually still considering sites. They suggested, if I repeat what they said, we're also in discussions with Barwood Land and our site in terms of the life site at Cranbourne Drive. Both sites could offer potential for part site consideration, and we're not close to these options. In the same statement, they also requested further consultation with the council, and we are aware, because we met up with them subsequently, that this consultation never took place. In terms of the site being put forward, I'm aware again on Monday it was suggested, well, this is the site that was put forward as the preferred option for the village of Otterbourne. Again, we just question where there doesn't seem to be any sort of real review of how that decision was taken. So we've raised multiple issues with this. Their own community consultation suggested that the site that they've put forward was actually, I think, 7th in terms of the out of the 8 sites. There were 77% of those responding to their consultation were against the allocation that they put forward. So it's just potentially there are other issues that happened subsequently, but we just can't see any evidence of, again, in terms of how they then came to that decision, and why it wasn't looked at further. We've sort of tried to get answers from the council, but we haven't had anything back. So it's just, again, it's sort of an issue in terms of the evidence base and transparency of decision making, essentially.
Thank you very much. O'Flynn Group.
Thank you. So just to, I guess, recap in terms of the process as I understand it was described, all sites were assessed equally on a no mitigation basis without the benefit of any considering supporting information. Sites were then selected, and then policy requirements were added to it, to the selected sites, in order that their performance against the criteria could be recorded, and that's the justification of the plan. So what there isn't is a body of evidence that says what the performance of rejected sites might have been had they been through the same policy on filter that the council would have applied to them if they've been allocated. That's my sort of understanding of what's been done. So that then takes you to the kind of, and maybe it's a rhetorical question, but what happens if there are certain types of site that you would only allocate on a policy on basis because they're of a certain scale or a certain type of location, but also perhaps they have a greater ability to incorporate policy on mitigation to then achieve a greater additionality in performance by adding on the policy. And we don't have that body of evidence here. So sites that you look at and go, imagine if you put, and I'm going to paraphrase unfairly, imagine if you put a really poor form of development on this site. God, it's terrible. Another site, imagine you put poor quality development on, well, it's less terrible just because of the nature of that site. The other site gets ditched and you move forward with the site that's suboptimal, potentially with the policy added to it. So you might say, so what? Well, the MPPF at Para 73, which deals with the supply of large homes being best
Sorry, I'm just turning that up.
Sorry, apologies.
Thank you.
So that this refers to policymaking authorities should identify suitable locations for such development, and it refers to the
Sorry, where are you?
sorry, the MPPF.
Yeah.
Oh, mine. Sorry, I do apologise. I've got the September 23 version open.
Obviously, the paragraphs changed.
Yes, it's the, you know, the one I mean. It's the one relating to large scale developments.
Yeah.
Sorry, the number changed. The content didn't. Yeah.
It's
Yes, it's 74. Yes, my mistake. But the content didn't change. So
if you just read it the first couple of lines.
So the supply of large numbers of new homes can often best be achieved through planning for larger scale development. Yeah. So what that says is you should look at, large scale development can often be best achieved through large scale developments such as new settlements or urban extensions to physically polluted towns, provided they're well located and designed and supported by necessary infrastructure and facilities, and then working with support communities and other authorities, identify suitable locations where they could help meet identified needs for development. In doing so, they should consider the opportunities presented by existing or planned investment in infrastructure, areas of economic potential, and then a series of requirements. But what that's clearly requiring for large sites is to apply policy on before you reject them. And that's so that it's not really about, is this the most appropriate strategy or not. In order arriving at an appropriate strategy, the MPPF requires you to consider those policy on at the very outset, because in a sense, if you don't apply policy on, nobody would ever allocate a large urban extension or new settlement at all. That's in a sense, that's precisely why the MPPF imposed that requirement on plan makers in that way.
Thank you. Okay, can I go back to the is it Mr. Ailey again? Specifically, the concern that's raised there about policy on, policy off, and I just want to clarify before we're talking policy on, policy off, what do we mean by that? Do we mean mitigation, or the policies in the plan, the application of the policies in the plan?
I understand. Yeah, I think when we're talking about going through this selection process, that the question in the first round was about policy on, policy off, as I understood it, with regards to the habitat regulates, the sustainability assessment of each individual site, and they are undertaken policy off, if you like.
And by policy off, what do you mean by that?
Not taking into account further measures in supporting documents submitted by site promoters, things that come through after the SHELAR process, in effect.
And why is that an effective way?
If we're just talking about the IIA, it's just to ensure that that assessment is on a consistent basis. But I would say that does not mean there is no scope or place for those other considerations to take place. When we talk about the additional elements that can lead to a site being considered suitable for allocation, for instance, the potential, for example, for Sir John Moore Barracks to deliver a park and ride in accordance with the Winchester movement strategy and all the rest of it is clearly relevant. I won't say it's the whole thing, but clearly factors like that are also to be considered, and that is in the process, is in paragraph 5.7 in the development strategy and site selection background paper, which talks about that considering options and where we go. In terms of where we go, move from a short list to the allocations. That's a lot of that narrative is about engagement with parish councils and what we do next, which is relevant to other points made around the table. But there is absolutely the potential for other factors, planning benefits and the rest of it to be part of this process. And they are documented in the rationale given for the selection of sites that follows each of the settlements in the paper. So we think that there is the space for it. You won't find a separate document with then where we've gone from this, but its place in the sequence of events is described in paragraph 5.7, and then the outcomes are in the rationale given for the identification of each site. The policies, just back to the IA for a minute, forgive me, because I think there's an outstanding point. The appraisal of each policy in the proposed emission plan does then take into account mitigating value. So as I said earlier, we haven't gone back and reviewed the SHLA assessments, but the policy for an allocation of a site clearly is based on then the sustainability appraisal of that site allocation is clearly based then on taking into account any on-site mitigation or whatever is associated with it, just to clarify that point.
I understand. Sorry, Mr. Fox, were you going to say something there?
I was just going to add, obviously with the Sheila process, sometimes you get a red line area, sometimes you get a lot of information to it. So I do think it's a logical way to start is policy off, because otherwise you're disadvantaging those people that have just put forward basically a red line. And obviously that red line site might actually be the best site you've got. But obviously just because they haven't put any information forward, I don't want to discount them just because they've got that. I want to deal with everybody on a level playing field right at the beginning, so that basically that's why it's policy off. And I think that's the correct way, because basically you are looking at the site. And obviously we're also planners, we go out on site and have a look, just like you are, to look at the sites. And obviously that's why we did that process, was go out and have a look at them. And we had a good knowledge base of the settlements and the sites before basically we did that kind of reconvening, sense checking back in the offices.
Okay.
Also, perhaps just worth pointing out, if I may, that obviously part of the methodology is the council's consideration and response to the representations made at the Reg 18 stage. And obviously, if a developer felt that additional information which they had with respect to an emission site made it superior to a site which had been tentatively allocated at the Reg 18 stage, they'd have the ability to make such representations, and of course very many did. And then part of the council's consideration thereafter is to consider each of those representations.
Okay, thank you for that. What about the point that was made about, we're getting into the scoring, and I don't want to get too much into that, but the site allocations, the proposed site allocations don't follow the settlement hierarchy. Is that a consequence of the application of the methodology?
No, I don't think they do, actually. I think the settlement hierarchy has fed into the identification of a level of additional development sought in each category of settlements. So we talked before about 100 to 120, 90 to 100, and then 50 to 60. That is then obviously driving us looking at opportunities in those settlements to meet that. So there's a clear read across, we think, from that. I'm reluctant to reopen the numbers debate. So if you're
No,
happy, I'll leave it there.
thank you. Thank you. And then is there anything that you can say to help me on the consultation with parish councils, when that took place, how it took place? And I think it's the regard you had to the parish council comments. I mean, we've already heard that regardless of whether it came from parish councils or not, it still went through, and please correct me if I've got any of this wrong, it still went through the rigours of the site selection process, the same as every other site. Could I just ask you to comment on that, Mr. Ailey, if you have anything else to say?
I don't
Or
know.
Mr.
Are you?
Fox?
Yeah, sorry. Are you? Obviously, we had comments from Mr. Packer about Sutton Scotney. I can specifically talk about that if you want, or obviously we can defer that because obviously it's going to come up in detail as part of obviously the market towns and rural areas. But I can certainly, I know that because I've lived and breathed it. So
okay.
Yeah.
Just give us the outline of
Give
that.
you the
I
outline.
think I understand it because
Yeah.
I've read the reps.
Yeah. So Mr. Packer is correct that obviously we didn't allocate a site in the Reg 18 local plan due to the sewage issues. We did engage with the parish council. In that particular instance, I had numerous exchanges with the parish councils and Mr. Packer, and I was actively trying to get them to speak to the developers, basically because we did have two active sites. And obviously I can only encourage as much as I can because some parish councils invited all the developers into one room to basically promote their site and talk about them. Now, regrettably, that didn't happen, but we certainly had, and I know with my cabinet member, had numerous meetings with the parish council when it became apparent that basically there was a solution on the table, which is now in the ground, the pipeline to solve the sewage issues. And basically we said to them, look, you know, we haven't got a reason why now we can't allocate a site in Sutton Scotney because basically there is a pipeline in the ground. It's going in the ground. It's in the ground now and operational. What is your preferred site? And they did do some consultation, the parish council, in that instance, on the parish council on the village design guide. And I was at the meeting with my cabinet member where we were saying to them, well, which site is basically your preferred site? And they said, well, I think it's kind of the site that we've chosen, Brightlands. We then did a Reg 19 public consultation drop-in event, which basically Mr. Packer's team were there. We didn't know they were going to be at the same event. And the parish council actually did a U-turn on us and said, well, actually, we prefer that site now. But we are firmly of the view that the site that we promoted, Brightlands, is the right site. We certainly had engagement with the parish councils up to, and I basically gave them a call before we published the Reg 19 and said, look, this is definitely going to go in. But like I say, we certainly, I know with my cabinet member, had various meetings with representatives from the parish council about what is their view and can they tell us.
And that site, what you say, you went independently without the views of the parish council and you assessed it in
we
the way.
based it on what the parish council told us at one of the meetings where basically the village design statement apparently said, asked a question about which site should be suitable. And they were saying, well, actually Brightland came out stronger. So that's why we went with it. We've done an analysis of the sites in Sutton Scotney, similar to what we did in Wickham as well. So we did an appraisal of that site, and that site selection paper obviously goes through the reasons why we selected Brightlands, and particularly to do with flooding, to do with the access road. So that's why we went with that site, but we're happy to explore that in more detail next week.
Yeah, okay. Is there anything else that anyone, I don't need any more help on this. Mr. O'Flynn, I was going to say. I know you're not Mr. O'Flynn. Sorry, Mr. Fry.
Well, yeah, I'll be whoever you want me to. Yeah, I'm just I can come back on Mr. Fox's point on the sort of level playing field. That it doesn't. It's not consistent with that paragraph in the framework, but essentially it doesn't make sense because just as different sites perform differently with mitigation, but they also, just by their inherent nature, they will also necessarily perform differently on the sort of no mitigation basis, just because of where they are and what they are. So it's not a level playing field. So for example, a large urban extension or a new settlement or whatever, if the only reason you would allocate it in line with the framework is with policy on mitigation and with information about how bus services are going to be provided and how new schools are going to be delivered and all of those kind of things. If you don't know those things, then you can't score it well, but you would never do it without doing those things. It's an inherent part of what anybody who's ever advanced a proposal of that sort would do. And it presumably then, it may or may not have done, but infected the way the sort of existing allocations. I mean, those existing allocations wouldn't have been allocated on that basis. That's point one. Just doesn't. It's not. It just doesn't work. It's not practically sensible, let alone not being in accordance with Paris 74. I think the point was also made that actually, don't worry, we took into account information that was supplied at Reg 18 stage, but it's not really clear how, because the scoring in the IIA for all of those sites just remains the same. It still remains on a no mitigation basis. And then I think reference was just to illustrate the significance of this point. If you look at the Sir John Moore Barracks site and the way it's treated in the IIA, so actually table 5.28 of the IIA is probably the most useful thing to look at. And it shows the performance of that site without mitigation and then the performance of the site with mitigation. And you can actually see quite stark differences. So minuses become positives, zeros become double positives. Effectively makes the site much better. In a sense, I'm not disputing that assessment, but the minuses become positives. It says considering mitigation in policy W2, which is the site that effectively the policy that sets what's required. You then look at what the policy requires, and it requires all the sensible things you would expect a large site to have, master plan, infrastructure, So sites that were rejected never had that treatment. And frankly, you compare the performance of the Sir John Moore Barracks site without mitigation against sites that were rejected, and it doesn't come materially any better, and in some cases worse than some of those sites that were rejected. So essentially just reveals the fundamental flaw, I have to say, in the site selection process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've heard that point. Does the council want to respond to that at all?
I appreciate there's only so far anyone wants to take this today. Just to say that the development strategy and site selection paper has a short list of sites adjacent, for instance, to Winchester, with a comparative assessment between Sir John Moore Barracks and others on the same, with the IIA on the same basis. The more detailed information on transport, landscape and heritage is in the appendix to that in that document. So we feel that with that and the rationale given for the selection of Sir John Moore Barracks and other sites in and around Winchester, that sets out sufficiently why we think it's an appropriate allocation.
Okay, it was the more general point rather than it's the general point that was made rather than the specifics. Did you have any comment on that? It's the same point really. Yeah. Well, policy on.
In many ways, I mean, I appreciate it's not the point, but the table is just showing that the policy working is doing its job, isn't it? It's improving the matters. But what I'm not clear on from what we've heard is that there would be a disproportionately different outcome from an appraisal of a policy on approach in the IIA for this work. I think we were able to take into account mitigate, what you could do. Clearly you wouldn't build out every corner of every site. There would be a process through which policy would do its best to make schemes appropriate and acceptable, and that was part of that in the room discussion that's outlined in paragraph 5.7 of the paper.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say I don't need any more help on that, but go on, Mr. Gately.
Thank you, Mark. Just on this point about the parish engagement, and just to briefly draw attention to the situation in Winchester, it was mentioned earlier that it's an unparished area, and of course what that means is that there are about 9 or 10 parishes that immediately encircle the city. And in paragraph 5.6 of the council site selection paper, what they made clear is that none of those parishes were requested to nominate sites. There was no target. So essentially no process for any kind of site selection across that array of parishes. And whilst you wouldn't necessarily expect those parishes to willingly nominate sites around Winchester, that would suggest a lack of leadership from the district to reach out and promote that process in the most sustainable location. So it's just to cover off that engagement point, that it's quite a different situation for Winchester compared with other parishes where you have a settlement that sits in the middle of it, and there's a distinction there, I think, that's useful to note.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gately. Okay, oh, Mr. Fox.
I thank Mr. Gately for actually pointing it out, because I forgot to mention that. We actually I personally attended 2 meetings with which had representatives from the parish councils around basically Winchester town, where I actually went through, I remember it it was a lovely summer's day, and went through each site individually and basically asked for their views collectively from the parish council perspective, picking up on that point that basically a lot of the parish councils are joined. And if I use Hursley, for example, where obviously you had representations from Pitvale, etc. And we went through those sites and we specifically asked for their views. Basically, the leader was present at the time, so was a cabinet member. We went through them literally and asked for their views. So they weren't excluded. They were definitely included, because I know I gave up a summer's evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's just move on to the next item, which is...
Sorry, Mum, I did have my...
Oh, I'm sorry,
Mr. That's okay. I'll be very brief. Just to come back on a couple of points specifically that Mr. Fox raised in relation to Wadston Parish Council again. Just going back to the evidence base, which I believe is sat within the development strategy and site selection document. There isn't a reference within that to any preference that Mr. Fox alleges that the parish council provided for the allocated site. I can only find reference to the meetings themselves. I can't see any reference to any preference. And just to pick up on the point about the meeting was hijacked, I think that's the phrase that Mr. Fox used. That wasn't the case. I mean, my understanding, I wasn't there, but my understanding was the parish council actually invited my clients to come along to that meeting and present the scheme as an alternative site for fairness, simply because it hadn't been done to date. And I go back to the point I made before, the original point, which was, had this been done much earlier in the process, which there was an opportunity to do so, then I think there would have been ample opportunity for a more meaningful and effective consultation with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to question 2, and this is really about the site boundaries. How were they established? And you've said you liaised with the promoter. First of all, obviously the promoter promoted a site, and then it went through the process of the Sheila, the IIA, site selection criteria, consultations, and then the evidence base. Is that right? Is there anything else that you wish to add to that?
Very briefly, only because it wasn't mentioned, is some certain sites lent themselves to particular opportunities or constraints that led to a refinement in the participant statement. For instance, it mentioned land at Rare Ridge Lane.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, the participant statement mentions land at Rare Ridge Lane in Bishop's Waltham.
Sorry, what participants?
My participant statement. Forgive me.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Right,
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I could have mentioned, for instance, as well, the site in Otterbourne, OT01, where there in effect is an offer on the part of the site promoter to only develop parts of the site and deliver some needed open space in Otterbourne. I know we'll be getting on to that, but I wanted to point out that individual offer and those sort of propositions, if you like, are also part of the process in identifying, if you like, the boundary of the developable area, if not the boundary of the whole site.
Okay. Okay, so you liaised with the promoters? as a
Yes.
so that's liaison with promotion. But it went through, I just want to be very clear, it went through the rigors of that assessment, which also dictated not only whether it should be proposed, but what the extent of the site was, etc.
Forgive me, yes. So there's a consideration, and the Sheila gives us a figure, a starting point, but then there's consideration of the site itself and the opportunities, and indeed the constraints that lead to the figure that you see in your plans. There's certainly sites at Calder Common were influenced by that. You can see with the heritage measures, heritage issues relating to some of those sites, which result in a reduction and a direction as to where in the site the development is likely to be appropriate, as well as those other examples I gave you.
Okay, so thank you very much. And can I just turn to capacities? And we're talking about this in broad terms. How did you? I know that you did some work through the Sheila on that and applied that methodology. Could you just explain how that was taken into account in indicating the indicative capacities of sites?
Just briefly, the Sheila process includes a pretty standard, I would say, approach with a density multiplier, which flexes a little depending on what settlement you're talking about. So in other words, a little higher in our more sustainable settlements, really to reflect the character of what's likely to be achievable as well as
that's
appropriate.
spatially specific,
Yes.
urban, rural, etc.
Yes.
Okay.
And then is then refined further with the size of sites, so that larger sites have an additional discount applied at a graded scale because they're expected to deliver additional uses such as open space and all the rest.
And that's the density multiplier that you
Exactly,
speak about.
yes.
So for things like open space and
Yes.
is that right?
Yes. So it's
Okay.
a two-stage approach. One is where you are, so the likely character of what would be acceptable, and then also due to the size of site being assessed, a further reduction because of the likelihood to deliver alternate or additional uses as part of that.
And then, as you said previously, consultation with site promoters.
Yes,
etc.
and then we get into the particulars of the site after we've got that initial Sheila figure. It's refined further due to either the characteristics of the site, any particular offer from the site promoter, or a constraint affecting the site. In the case, for instance, of Railridge Lane.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ayling. Does anybody wish to comment on that at all? The methodology. It's really the methodology that was used to define boundaries and to define capacities. Could I turn to Mr. Wiseman, please?
Thank you, Ma'am. Just a quick point in response to Mr. Ayling. And you've alluded to sometimes you get a red line, sometimes you get a red line in a vision document per se. I just wonder what information you had for Railridge Lane, if you are able to say, please. Thank you.
Sorry, could you direct your question to me, please?
Sorry, what information is available to substantiate the quantum of development at Railridge Lane? What was put forward?
Where?
Railridge Lane.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll let you, any question you want to directly ask the council, I'll let you do it outside this forum. Barwood Land?
Larger outside area. So when you look at 50, which they are required to do, it would look to deliver based on the green calculations. Raise this. Again, we haven't really had a solid response how they think this could be viable. Let's see how it That would just be interesting clarity about whether that's actually how that figure has been considered. I think it would equate to about 15%, which where it is. But it's settlement, very high density.
Thank you. Could I turn to O'Flynn, Mr. Spry?
Yes, thank you. So for my client side, when I was assessing the slough, it took the gross site area, divided the area by 2, and then applied a density of 30 dwellings to the hectare. That's which for a large site. And in a sense, absent any alternative information provided by a promoter, that's perhaps not an unreasonable approach. The issue is that, and that figure was in the original iteration of the Sheila, but it's remained all the way through to the post Reg 18 stage. And the I don't have them to hand, but the submissions that were made in our response to the call for sites and in response to the various consultations said that the number of homes being proposed on site was lower than were.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Mr. Flynn. Are you talking about a specific site?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Working our way through, aren't we?
Sorry. Mr. Spry, are you talking about a specific site?
I'm to give an example of the approach.
Okay.
So I'm just to use it as a worked example.
Okay, so what is the site that you're?
Well, in this particular instance, I'm talking about a Sheila site.
Okay. Yes, I understand.
So, in the sense, the site's irrelevant, or the details of it are irrelevant. It's more the process. So, the capacity was identified at the first Sheila. In our case, we put in representation saying, well, actually, we think the site would actually do X. Here's a master plan. But yet the capacity in the Sheila and the site's consideration through the plan remained the same all the way through. So it's an example of how information that was available wasn't taken into account, and that may have therefore infected its interpretation, the council's interpretation of the site's performance, because in a sense they overestimated the number of homes that were being suggested for the site through the local plan process when there was information available to them to suggest the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, would you mind turning your nameplate so that I can see it? Bloor Holmes.
Slightly opposite view on Bloor's site in Wickham, where information provided to the council suggested that it could accommodate a greater number. There was a vision document provided to them, but actually, whilst part of the site that's been promoted has been allocated, it's for a lower number than was indicated in the Sheila. So that would suggest that perhaps the council hasn't always taken into account the information that was available to them.
Okay. Thank you. Does the council have it? There are three. Well, if you just comment on the 2 points that have been made about the information that was available and whether that was taken into account and how. And then could you just, if there is an issue that arises with the, was it Barwood land, whether that is an anomaly, that the site in Otterbourne and the 50 dwelling per hectare.
If I may, I don't think it's a flaw in the Sheila.
Sorry, are you referring to the Otterbourne one first?
No, I was doing with
yeah.
So I don't think it's a failure of the Sheila, as long as those who use it understand how far it goes and then stops, that it is prepared in the way in which it does. It highlights I think it's used a number of times in the document as a notional capacity or whatever, because of the usual angst that arises from the publication of Sheilas and all the rest of it. But I think having it as the Sheila that we understand that's not actually necessarily the proposition being put to us by a site promoter, but the Sheila is, there's a lot of advantages in it being prepared in a consistent and coherent manner. Site promoters change, visions change, all the rest of it. And actually, what we need to know is the broad, the rough size and scale of the opportunity to be refined through particular options and all the rest. So I don't think that's a mistake in that case. I think I've given an answer about how we then go on to take into account what's actually being proposed to us.
Yeah, understand that.
With regards to Wickham and the site there, actually, it's just point of detail, but we actually had 2 Sheila parcels, which we now understand has been promoted to us as one by the site promoter. And so when they say half a site, we in our head it was a site and an adjacent site that went through that process. But I think you can see the process we've followed. You can see their representation, and they're in effect saying that the proposed to be allocated site could be extended further to north, and we've given our reasons why we don't think that's appropriate. I might try to keep my answers to the Sheila and the site points.
Absolutely, because we'll drill down to the detail, no doubt.
And with Otterbourne, I'm afraid I don't have a detailed answer today, and for that matter, I'll reserve my response on Rare Ridge for those sessions as well.
And all I want to know is we're talking about methodology.
Yes, I'm not aware of a particular anomaly or issue that arose in a significantly different answer at Otterbourne, but we'll have a fuller answer for you at that session.
Okay. Is everyone comfortable to carry on?
Sorry, can I just clarify that I wasn't necessarily talking about the additional land which has been promoted. I was actually talking about the site that is proposed to be allocated, and that the numbers are slightly different between the proposed allocation, what's in the Sheila, and the information provided to the council in the representations.
Okay, thank you, and we can deal with that when we deal with the proposed allocation. Okay, is everyone comfortable to carry on? Because we've only got. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Packett. It's where you're sitting.
Yeah, I think I'm at the angle, aren't I?
Well, you're doing the right thing.
Waving it around.
Your card,
Apologies for that. Yeah, just a couple of very quick points, which is more of a question through you to the council. I think I'm just conscious that the Environment Agency have provided updated flooding information. We will come on to this next week. I appreciate that, but it does have potential bearings on capacity, as potential bearings as well on the site selection methodology that's used. So I just wanted to ask the question: have the council had an opportunity of reviewing that, and are they preparing any additional evidence as a consequence of that updated mapping?
Okay, well, the council can quickly answer that.
Sorry, is this the latest flood mapping from the EA?
Yes.
Yes. Well, we've certainly looked at it in relation to Mr. Packer's site, and it doesn't really change the situation. We've looked at obviously what the flood maps say now, and we can provide that as a separate document in terms of what the flood maps did say and what they do say now. I know we've looked at that, and obviously it's flooding around the entrance of the site.
Okay, I mean, that's a conversation to take outside this room, really, but just gave you the courtesy of a response there. Okay, let's move on to question 3, and I don't want to rehearse what we have said, and maybe it's something that has already been covered, but it's about flexibility. Should one of these sites fail to come forward, what's the flexibility? Council, can I put it to you? I think I know what your answer is, and I think I know what the table's answer is, but
just for completeness sake, just the hearing statement does refer to in passing policy H7 rural exceptions and E9, because this is about both employment as well, of course. They both talk about they both give a little flexibility with regards to local needs. So that's with us. But the main gist of the response as put forward by the council is about the potential of relaxation of the phasing policy if the delivery has slipped to the extent that we're starting to fall into a 5-year supply position. Then the proposition is that the phasing policy would slip and allow those greenfield sites to come forward at an earlier date. That's what we've got.
Okay, we've heard about that, and we've heard about the lack of flexibility with regard to the overall requirement. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add to that, Mr. Young?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite important for us, actually, if I may say so. I know there've been anecdotes and bits of it up to now, but just for the avoidance of doubt, Blaw's have bought a site, a golf course site, which could accommodate 1,000 houses on the edge of Winchester. Scored well in some of the assessments, better than the allocated site for 150 homes, and we're looking at things like park and ride as well. The park and ride on that side of the city is full. I've been to all of them. That one's full. So there's more need for more park and ride, although there's a degree of reluctance from Hampshire Council, who want the one to the south that's as empty as you can get extended. But that's a matter for another day. So why is this issue about? Well, first of all, there's no flexibility in this plan at all, which is baffling. We all thought there was flexibility with the buffer, but it turns out the buffer wasn't really a buffer. We all know what a buffer is because they're in the MPPF. It turned out it wasn't a buffer, it was the unmet need for the area to the south. Now, we've been critical of that. If it is a buffer, then that would be different. But since it isn't, and that's their stated position, then we've got no buffer and we've got no non-implementation allowance. And we can see, can't we, that some sites in previous versions of the Winchester plan haven't come forward according to plan. So there is your immediate empirical evidence that you need flexibility. You need sites to come forward when sites don't happen. Otherwise, the council are critical of planning by appeal, but you'll just get planning by appeal. So, for example, Blaw Homes had a site in Birmingham for about 800 homes on a golf course. Langley, the big allocation in Birmingham, didn't come forward, still didn't come forward. So we did a windfall site as an appeal in front of the Secretary of State. Mr. Brokenshire, his parting shot before he left office was to grant planning permission for that. 800 homes as a windfall. So, either you're going to get massive windfalls or you can actually plan. And as I say, the credentials of our site have already been identified. But in particular, where's the plan B here when things don't go according to plan? And where is the planning even for July next year when they've got a 20% increase? This plan certainly covers that before they've done their review, if they ever do their review. So what is wrong with having reserved sites? I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't have reserved sites, particularly in a scenario like this. And look, if everything goes according to plan, and the review is in place and they're accommodating huge amounts of unmet need, fine. But what if it doesn't? Are you better to have identified suitable sites? Now, you obviously, as all inspectors do, don't identify sites, but you may say to the council, we think you do need some significant sites, and Winchester is an obvious place to look at. So, yes, of course, we think this plan should be found unsound. But an alternative, certainly as far as my clients are concerned, would be to be identified, asking the council to go away and look at major or looking at significant reserve sites. But in particular, the John Moore Barracks site. I mean, the idea that that's going to deliver houses in the next couple of years is fanciful. Okay. And all I would say on that is I have noticed with Matter 6 that there's nobody been invited to attend on behalf of the development industry who aren't actually on the sites themselves. So Carla are there and the defence estates are there, or whatever the name is now. And I'd just politely ask you whether you, because you have the inherent power to invite anybody to attend, we would like to attend that session next Wednesday and just be a voice from another developer who isn't in the plan. I'll just leave that with you. But yeah, flexibility would be perfect. And it's flexibility specific to Winchester that I'm talking about, which is a very obvious place for development. It isn't just us. Vistry has a number of sites on the side of the city, and Vivid has a site as well. You know, you would invite the council to go away and look at delivering some more, or identifying some more sites. What's the harm of that when we know they're going to have to be delivering at a rate of over 1,000 a year? And actually, they've already achieved that. The final point, I just want to make this point. That's even before you get into the issue of the unmet need to the south, and the unmet need to the south is the elephant in the room. We've just been described in that way. I just went back actually, and I mentioned Kevin Ward's letter to the council at Warwick, and it's very interesting because Kevin Ward was at an inquiry in West Berkshire, and I happened to be at that inquiry, and I remember him vividly saying on the day the letter came out, I better put my hard hat on. And the reason was he anticipated a reaction to an inspector looking for an effective solution. He didn't actually fail the Warwick plan on duty to cooperate. He failed it on the fact that it wasn't effective and failed soundness on that basis. That was on the 8th of June when we were sat in our inquiry in West Berkshire, incidentally in an inquiry which he allowed because the council promised they'd do a review. And now 10 years later, they still haven't done that review. So that's just another example of all the reviews that never happen. But 3 days later, the leader of that council wrote to Mr. Brokenshire and said, you're very unhappy that the inspector had found the plan, not failing the duty to cooperate, but found it unsound. And 4 days after that, Mr. Brokenshire writes his pragmatic letter, which we all know about. Now, we know from Paul Morrison's letter, your chief executive, that pragmatism was unwelcome at the inspectorate. And we all know why it took place. We had Conservative leaders writing to a Conservative Secretary of State. We've now gone, as I said, from the era of pragmatism to the era of effectiveness. We are seeing in inspectors' report after inspectors' report, common sense breaking out everywhere. Plans are being rejected everywhere, not just Bournemouth, not just Shropshire, not just Elmbridge, it's everywhere. And the reality is that we have moved away, or inspectors have been able to move away from that pragmatism to effectiveness. And it's ironic, isn't it, that actually it was that letter that clearly triggered, it was Kevin Ward's seminal examination letter, which really grappled with the issues of unmet need, which triggered that letter, which we've had a decade in the dark ages. We've come out of that period now, and all the plans are being rejected because they're not being effective, but they're also failing the duty to cooperate because inspectors are saying you haven't really had a dialogue that's led to an effective solution. And that's what we're asking for. That's our primary case. Our secondary case is obviously, at the very least, you need reserve sites. You absolutely need reserve sites. It's all going to go wrong. And people are going to point to this examination, if it does go wrong, and go, look how Winchester failed to meet the national ambition of 1.5 million homes. Because if they don't meet that, it's not, we all know, it's not about permissions, it's about delivery. And if this will be one of the plans that people will point to and go, Winchester got away with effectively using loads of sites from a previous plan, not having any reserve sites, not having any safeguarded land, and not dealing with the unmet need to the south. And this will be a classic example of perpetuating pragmatism when pragmatism has finished.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Could I just go to the council, please? You haven't, it is right, you haven't included a non-implementation rate. Why is that?
Discount.
We've not got obviously a discount, to put it bluntly. It is interesting, in the previous local plan, I understand we did have reserve sites. What happened was,
sorry, I'll go on to
Yeah.
reserve sites.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
non-implementation.
so we haven't got
Yeah,
that,
why?
obviously, but we have got a discount for obviously the windfall sites, which Mr. Obcheck went through this morning. We have discounted basically quite considerably compared to what obviously has happened.
So, sorry, why haven't you got an implementation rate?
I don't think there's any requirement in the MPPF to actually include basically a non-implementation rate. I'm not aware of anything that basically says you've got to include. That's why, in a way, we changed the word buffer to unmet need, because people were getting very confused. They were saying it should be 10%, it should be this, it should be that. People were getting very confused.
Have you got anything else to say on that? I can come to my own conclusion. I've got my own.
We've had the same points many times, so
Oh,
responded many times.
okay. I'll let you respond to the reserve sites. It's about flexibility. It's about housing requirements without repeating everything.
Yep. All I was going to say was, obviously we did have reserve sites in the previous local plan, and they just came forward basically, and we couldn't actually refuse them. Basically, they were reserve sites are meant to come forward after the allocations, and they just came forward through the development management process, and we couldn't actually refuse them. So in fact, and obviously that, in a way, you could say helped our delivery rates, but it did. They just came forward at the time. They weren't reserve sites in terms of basically sites weren't being delivered. They just came forward.
Okay, I understand that. I don't want to labour the point. Sorry, there is somebody who wants to speak. Oh, it's Ms. Mulliner. Sorry.
Thank you. I completely concur with what Chris Young has just said, but just to add on to that, I think even if there was flexibility in the numbers, the problem that we've got again goes back to it's difficult to understand what that flexibility means or could mean in terms of if one of the sites doesn't come forward, what does that do to compliance with the settlement hierarchy and the distribution of development in the district to meet the district need? And equally then, if one of the sites in the South Hampshire area doesn't come forward, where is that flexibility coming from? Because it's not being dealt with in two distinct ways, with two understanding of the geographies involved, it's difficult to understand what flexibility there would be anyway, because we don't really understand the distribution of the development and how the sites have actually accorded to where the need arises. So it's not just a case of flexibility in the overall numbers, but there's no flexibility really to deal with, well, what happens to the pressure, for example, if the South Hampshire area some of those sites start to drop away, what pressure that puts on the rest of the district, and where the flexibility is to actually plug that gap, if you like. So I think it goes beyond just the pure numbers. It's actually, there's no flexibility either in the way in which the council can ensure that their distribution strategy and their settlement hierarchy is met, even if we thought it had been met and it was, right, which obviously we've been over that. But even then, it's just not very clear. It's not just apparent. It's not apparent in the plan.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to go back to the council on something that maybe is nagging me. The non-implementation rate, we went through some site by site. That was based on your assessment and your dialogue with promoters and development intel. Sorry, I don't want to put words into your mouth. Is that your justification for not including a non-implementation rate because you don't think it's necessary?
I think that's correct. It is dialogue with the obviously developers,
Okay. Yeah,
and obviously we've heard different views about whether or not you're in the plan and out the plan, about whether or not you agree or disagree with those things. Obviously,
and we've heard comments about what developers say.
Yeah, what developers say. Yeah. So it's a two-way street.
I just wanted to be clear on that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Bewley Homes.
Thank you, ma'am. Not to reiterate the points made around the table already today and earlier in the week, but just to highlight that we would definitely support more supply side flexibility within the plan, which I think is apparently absent at the moment. But I'd also highlight that the site selection and the spatial strategy chosen has relied on a number of large allocations, notwithstanding what we've already spoken about, prior commitments and extant permissions. So in terms of just having that flexibility moving forward, we don't kind of consider that there's sufficient sites allocated to do so. And similarly, that not to underestimate the role that small and medium sized sites can make in plugging those kind of earlier gaps as well, given that there's been quite a lot of discussion around larger allocations and larger sites, just to kind of keep that in mind as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, is there anything else that anyone wishes to add? Mr. Packer?
I didn't have to waive it this time. Yeah, just very briefly, again, not to repeat what's been said already, but just to reinforce some of the comments, perhaps. First of all, the comment that Ms. Mullinan made about the geographical regions, just to say, would agree with that, and that if you are exploring flexibility, buffer, however you want to describe it, I think it would be sensible to apply that to each of those regions to take into account the potential for lack of delivery within those regions itself. And the second point, again, just to reinforce the role that small and medium sites can play in plugging that gap, which potentially applies more to the market towns and rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gately?
Thank you, Mum. It's just as a final observation that the vulnerability of the failure of the barracks site at Winchester has a particularly intense effect on delivery at that location. So the 900 allocated by that policy is 63% of the total new allocations proposed at the city, and the only one that is likely, to provide a significant amount of affordable housing. So it's just to point that out, whereas in some of the other parts of the district, there's a distribution of smaller sites, any one of which perhaps arguably wouldn't have a huge effect spatially, but that specific issue of the risk of that one site failing in Winchester would have a catastrophic effect on the already very low allocation for the city.
Just to, we don't know actually if that would deliver affordable housing as a brownfield site. It's been suggested family housing, and that may be a fair conclusion. But at the moment, as a brownfield site, the plan seeks to accommodate a lower amount and so on, but it says you shouldn't go below that level, or phosphates and shouldn't go below that. But the viability evidence is what it is, and so. And we haven't got that viability evidence, so we don't know if that will deliver affordable housing. And if it doesn't, then you've just got the 150 homes. That's the only affordable housing for the next 15 years.
Okay. Thank you.
I do disagree, because obviously you're speculating about the site. The Sir John Moore Barracks is a DOI site. It is going to bring forward affordable housing. I know it is, because I've been in those discussions. It's not the only site in Winchester. Kings Barton is delivering affordable housing as well. So there are other sites. It's not just the Greenfield site at Land at Courtney Road.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fox. I'm clear on that.
There's just one matter. We've obviously gone through this afternoon without a mid-session interval. We had intended in that interval to review the final draft of the what happens if the plan date changes document, which we would like to present to you this afternoon.
Okay, let's have a break till 4 o'clock, and then we'll come back and have a short submission from the council on that point. Thank you very much. Now 4 o'clock, and this hearing session is resumed. So this is to hear what the council, I posed a question.
You did?
I told you I haven't made my mind up on this, and I asked for a summary of what the implications would be.
Yes, and we've reduced this into primarily, exclusively numerical form. I'm going to get Mr. Opachich, who's actually done the number crunching, to explain it to us, and then I will have very brief comment once he's done that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma'am. Right, so on the first page, we start off with what's in the submitted plan. So this is table H2 that we were looking at this morning, basically, just for context, really. Obviously, that hasn't changed. The second group of numbers or lines is what happens if the plan period starts in 2022. And the standard method need, we've used the, rather than 676 times however many years, we've taken the relevant years out of table H1. It doesn't make a lot of difference whether you use 676 or not, but those are slightly higher numbers. So from our point of view, that's a worst case scenario. So you've got the standard method need, and the supply, which has obviously been reduced by taking out the first couple of years, and what's left for unmet needs. Because to get a requirement, you then add the unmet needs into the standard method, and that becomes your requirement. So that goes down to just under 1100. And then we do the same thing, taking off another year. Oh, sorry, I didn't realise not everyone knew what we were talking about. Should I just wait for that to be circulated?
Well, I think you're being very kind, offering it to everyone around the table, because I was going to post it on the website, but you have your very own copy.
Yeah. So, and the third set of figures is basically just taking off an extra year. So the standard method need goes down a bit, the supply goes down a bit, and what's left for unmet needs goes down a bit. So that's
sorry, just to interrupt. One point just to mention is that you'll see that the figure for the South Downs National Park goes down, starts at 350. So where it says WCC supply 350, then 333. That's to represent the fact that starting in 2020, it's estimated to be 350, and then you've got actual delivery figures which are reflected.
Got it.
And that's the point I should have mentioned, that these are district-wide figures, because obviously the standard method is a district figure. So when we work out the impact of standard method and so on, this is looking at the whole district. So that's what it does in terms of overall numbers and for what's available for unmet needs. And then over the next pages, we look at the impact on 5-year land supply. So the first table is again taken from the council's statement on matter 4. So that's the plan as we propose it should be. You'll see at the top is the 15040 figure, so it takes account of the error and corrects that, but that is taken straight from the council statement. The second table, and this is 5-year land supply on adoption of the plan, so at a base date of April 25. In the second example, looking at if we were looking at a 2022 start date, basically the requirement goes down. You compare it with the over the page, the supply over the page. So you've got the requirement is basically the standard method need plus what's available for unmet needs minus what's happening in the national park. So that is that figure there.
Yeah.
So you basically you get a lower requirement because of that. You get an equally lower number of completions to take off of it, and the net result I can't quite work out why I've got a difference of 1, but anyway, the net result is the 5-year of the local plan requirements the same as in the table above of one dwelling. So actually, the impact is nothing in terms of 5-year land supply. I haven't bothered with a 2023 example because it's still the same. There is no change. You still get a 6.6 year supply under that. And it's basically the same for decision making. So on the third page, the decision making first table is taken from the council statement. That's the plan submitted with the corrections, and then the table below that is the 2022 start date, and you start off with the same numbers as in the previous example, but we apply a 5% buffer for the first year, and then from 2026 onwards we apply a 20% buffer. So the 5% is applied for 1 year, the 20% for 4 years. And obviously you end up with a higher annual requirement, but we still end up with a 5.6 year supply. So basically in terms of housing land supply calculation, there isn't an implication. The main implication is in terms of what's available for unmet needs.
Okay, so for my purposes, it's in terms of housing land supply, it's the plan making ones that I'm primarily concerned with. And then you've set out the implications on total housing provision. Do you know what the implications would be for the spatial delivery? No, okay.
That would take a bit longer because we'd actually have to work out what completions and so on.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to take this away. And I'm not looking for responses around the table at this point or responses from anyone. I'm going to take it away. I'm going to consider it and I'll come to my conclusions.
I just wondered if I may, just to
Yes, of course.
explain where what the council's position was in the light of this.
Yes.
First of all, as you know, our primary case is that you should stick to 2020.
Yes.
So all of this is without prejudice to that. Secondly, we say that if you do choose to move, the sensible date is to move to 2022.
Why?
Because that's an accurate reflection of the kind of time constraints that are properly reflected in terms of preparing the plan. Discussion that we had, I think, around the table the other day. And the third position that the council adopts is it doesn't really make any particular difference to the overall approach. What changes is that the amount available for unmet needs goes down in each of the years, depending on where you set the date. Now, the way that the plan has been prepared, I'm not going to go back over all my submissions, but you'll recall the push strategy to which I drew your attention, and this is the first stage of that, is to provide what is available after Winchester needs met as a contribution to unmet needs based on the spatial strategy we've adopted. And if you take that approach, it doesn't make a real difference whether it's 1900 or 1100 or 714. The position is the same. And obviously the change in the numbers available for unmet needs simply reflects the fact that there was a large period of delivery in the years that have been taken out of the planned period. But nevertheless, what one can't say is that every single one of those homes was occupied by a Winchester person. They might just as well, in proportion, be occupied by somebody based in Havant or Portsmouth. So that's what the council's position is.
Okay, thank you. I'll suggest that this document is put on the examination website and we'll explain exactly what it is. So that will be ED 23 of 25, I think it is. But anybody from the council want to say anything more on that? Well, thank you very much for that piece of work. That's very helpful. Very quickly, Mr. Young.
Respecting what you've said, which is you don't want a discussion, but are we now going to have a session to discuss this? Because this is obviously profound.
No, I'm going to consider this. This is for my purposes.
Yeah.
It's a note to help me. I don't intend at the moment to ask for any comment on it or ask for representations on it. Okay, this is for my purposes at the moment to help me in my decision making.
Okay, I understand that. That's what you've said. That gives me a concern, I'll be honest, that we can't discuss that, particularly if you look at that unmet needs figure, which goes down to 714 against the levels of unmet need. It's your decision, but I would be deeply concerned if we didn't have an opportunity to discuss this.
Why?
Because it's profound.
We've already discussed it.
Well, first of all, there was the debate about the 2022-23. Nobody was talking about 2022. Remember, you asked me specifically 2023.
You said 2023.
And it aligns with the idea that you shouldn't, be needing to renew your standard method figure for a 2-year period. The 714 though just jumps straight out to you. I mean, we'll all be crawling all over these numbers with our team at Savills, no doubt others will as well. But and the implications for what that means for delivery in Winchester.
But we've spoken about that. We've spoken about what the implications are of the unmet need.
If I may finish though, just that figure of 714 is what a lot of us have been saying. You shouldn't be looking back to 2020. 714 is a tiny fraction of the unmet need, which is going unaccounted for. I know it's been presented, well, it doesn't really affect our 5-year land supply. None of us are interested particularly in that, or certainly not significantly interested. What we're interested in is the fact that the unmet needs have now fallen to 700, even against the PFSH figure of 11,000, let alone our figure of 40,000. And I think that's really profound. I think we should have a discussion on it, but it's ultimately your choice.
Yeah, okay. I'll think about that. Thank you for that, Mr. Young. Bargate.
Thank you. Just not going into the numbers, but just our position obviously was about not looking back and then counting, because that's the standard methodology. If it's resetting the clock, then basically it needs to start in 2020. It either needs to take the approach of the standard methodology figure of 691, and that's the base date, and it moves forward on that basis without changing the standard methodology each year, or the plan period should start in 2024. This doesn't deal with that, which was one of our concerns.
Yeah, I heard your concern. Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to have the people who were here previously aren't here, so I don't want to have a discussion with a select group when there are other people who took part in that discussion yesterday and haven't got the opportunity now. I'll just take Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you. It is a quick point. It just cuts to the validity of the statements of common ground, where we're now discussing the figure of 714. I'll leave that with you.
Well, we're not discussing it. That's the point. We're not discussing it. This is for my purposes. I wanted to understand what the implications of that, of changing the plan date was. I've got it here and I'll consider what I'm going to do with it.
Understood.
Thank you. Okay, it's now nearly 4:15. Are there any other matters? I've heard everything that everyone said. Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah. Any idea when the agendas for next week become available?
Probably Monday.
Thank you. And they'll go up on the website.
They'll go up on the website.
That's
yes,
correct.
I don't know if the website is fully working yet. Oh, great. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your contributions, everyone. Have a nice weekend and we'll see you on Wednesday.